Thank you very much, Chairman. And just if I may, a short statement.
Well, I was just going to say something first, James, if I may.
You certainly may.
I'm just making sure we could hear you. So I'd like to welcome you to the meeting and confirm that I have exercised discretion available to me to interpret standing orders, and with the agreement of the other voting members of the board, to suspend them if necessary, to invite you, Mayor Palmer, to join the meeting in an informal, non-voting capacity, recognising the combined authority's role as the strategic transport authority. Mayor Palmer, and this is for myself, I've invited you in the spirit of future collaborative partnership working to discuss issues and items of common purpose. I understand you wish to make a brief statement, and would now be an appropriate time, and from your comments I believe it would be.
Yes, certainly, Chairman. And good afternoon to the rest of the board and to those people who are listening and watching. It's a pleasure to be invited to attend this executive board, and I would like to thank the chair for the invitation. This is an important first step in improving joint working arrangements between the Greater Cambridge Partnership and the combined authority, and the business board will shortly be nominating their representative to the executive board. The city deal sets out the purpose of having a business board representative on the executive board as being to ensure close alignment between the objective and plans of the city deal and the business board. And I look forward to the business board representative making a positive contribution to this executive board in helping to achieve that alignment. Projects such as the CAM and its alignment with East West Rail have implications for business and growth well beyond Greater Cambridge. And I would hope that the attendance of myself and the business board representative will help provide that context. It is important that our joint working arrangements are at this political level as well as at officer level, so that we have a shared vision for the delivery of the city deal. The Combined Authorities Transport and Infrastructure Committee will be receiving a report on an alternative route for the C2C scheme at its meeting on the 4th of November 2020. For all future CAM decisions, I would like to see decisions being made by the Combined Authority as well as the Greater Cambridge Partnership, and I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you very much, Mayor. So could you, I didn't quite get the C2C reference and exactly what you were saying. Is it coming to the next board meeting of the CPCA, did you say?
We have a transport committee on the 4th of November, which is the appropriate place for us to take the alternative route for C2C. And that report will be obviously going into that committee. And we would like to share all details of that with you, of course.
Will that be, sorry, maybe this isn't the right place on the agenda for this, but obviously you kind of opened up the discussion a little bit. So Chair's discretion again. Will we be seeing details of that before the Transport Committee meets?
I believe that our offices are working closely, which I think is a positive step. We know that this is a situation that needs to be sorted out very quickly, but we also need to take the public with us, which is imperative. And we're very, very keen to find the right solution and help you to deliver the scheme that you've worked towards. So we have an alternative and we think it's a very positive solution. And of course, in bringing it before the Transport Committee of the Combined Authority, we'll also get the opportunity to bring it before the GCP as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification, Mayor. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in at all or whether to move on that. If anyone raises their hand, I'll bring them in quickly on that. Lewis Herbert.
Well, I'm keen to see this alternate route, James, because you did say that in January, which is now 9 months ago, that you would be proposing an alternate. If there are two options, i.e. one that's been worked up on your route, I would like to see there being a demonstrable comparison at the earliest possible opportunity, because even if there needs to be some further work on your scheme, including in conjunction with the GCP, I do think it's important that if there are two options on the table, that they're properly assessed and we get on. As you'd be aware, we've been working on this for some time, and we do believe that it is consistent and compliant with your objectives. I know you've made a point about adding a second person on the board. I take it in the spirit of welcoming you, but I do remind you, James, that it's this board that decides its membership. So whilst there may be some requests, it is up to the GCP board to decide who sits on it. And I note that section 67 of the devolution deal states quite clearly that the combined authority will work with the GCP and it will support it in delivering the objectives of the city deal. So thank you for joining us, James. I look forward to working with you.
Okay, thank you, Lewis. Claire Ruskin.
Just a brief point back to come on to Cambridge. This is something that is very much needed by the business community. Just wondered if, because the other proposal is coming between this meeting and next meeting rather than before this meeting, which we were hoping for, whether we should put it on the decision matrix for the next meeting to make sure we have that in the progress review.
Okay, point taken on that. Thank you very much. Obviously, we'll take that away to officers. Phil Mendigo.
Thank you, Roger. Just a very quick point again, just to welcome James to the board. I think it's really helpful that you're going to be here. I hear what you say about officers working together, and obviously there is a need to progress this scheme given the delays we've had. Is there any opportunity for a joint GCP combined authority assessment of this in the meantime?
I think that's probably through me to you, James. Okay.
Well, it's certainly my ambition that we don't end up in the unedifying situation that we found ourselves in the past, arguing through the press. And I think that clearly I hope all of us want to find the right solution and to find a solution that's palatable, not just to ourselves and to business, but to the general public as well. It's never been my intention to delay unnecessarily any scheme. I just want to see the schemes that are aligned appropriately. And I would hope that I know that our teams are working closely. I know that they're sharing information that they haven't shared before. And let's be honest, that's common sense. That's what they should be doing. But equally, it does need leadership and it needs a governance that's set up to allow that to happen with political oversight. I'm only here as a representation of the people. I'm not here because of anything else. I'm only here because I was elected, and otherwise I would not be involved in this conversation. But my aim, I hope, being part of this board, is that we can iron out any problems and we don't ever have a repeat of what's happened with the Camborne to Cambridge route, and that we from now on have our arguments in private and our solutions in public.
So thank you for that. I completely concur with what you were saying. What I really wish happens and would like to see as soon as possible is that political oversight, so that we can actually make sure there's agreement there as well. So oversight doesn't necessarily mean in charge, it means input and knowing what's going on. So, in certain areas, I fully agree with that, James. So thank you for that. Just to have a full hand here, Neil Goff.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to also welcome James. Thank you so much indeed for your comments about sort of steps forward. So most welcome. And actually, my comment through the chair was going to be the same as Phil's, really. But I'm very keen that we work together with the combined authority and sort of pursue the idea which was contained in our letter to you in July, which was looking at a sort of jointly commissioning a sort of independent review of the options as a way of moving forward this critical corridor. So I welcome your statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. James, Mayor Palmer, just for clarity, So it's going to go to your transport on early November. I can't remember the exact date, but our officers will be working on it before then, especially that particular new route. And obviously we have a meeting then in December as well, which we can discuss. So hopefully it will all gel and fit in quite nicely. Is that your thoughts on this?
I think that's exactly it. Just repeat, it's the 4th of November. I
4th
think
of
we
November.
feed very nicely into your meeting in, or are now meeting in December. And I think that, as I said, I hope that we would now be able to see a way forward where there is common sense collaboration, because the reality is that all of us want is to solve the horrific traffic problems in and around the Cambridge area and to promote growth in the economy and business, and solve the housing crisis that we're suffering. I know that we all are desperate for that solution. So I hope that we can find common ground, and I'm sure that there is a way to do that.
And I know this is totally not meant to be the way the agenda works, but I just think this is such an important topic. So obviously on everyone's mind is Cambourne to Cambridge, but are other things in your mind going to the Transport Committee and joint officer working between us and things that we should be preparing to discuss? I'm just asking more to make sure that we're aware of your thoughts going forward, and so that you're aware of our thoughts as well.
Well, I think, you know, from what we've learned from the discussions that we've had and from the work that's been done, is that in order to solve these real problems, we are actually interreliant. The routes outside Cambridge are not strong BCR, benefit cost ratio, individually. The tunnels alone are not strong individually BCR. Joined up, they're immensely strong, and the ability to deliver growth across a wider region is significant. Housing, business growth, and to turn Cambridge from, you know, what it is now into a world-renowned, was already a world-renowned cluster, but it's 57th in the world. We want to compete at the very, very highest level, of course. So there is no reason why we can't, as I said, solve these problems. I haven't publicly spoken about any of your other schemes. I have been involved, of course, with the C2C scheme, but I haven't spoken publicly about any of your schemes. But hopefully, from now on, we can have these discussions at the appropriate time and input the benefits for both of us into making sure we make the right decisions. And I think that we will find, in working together, working alongside one another, that the solutions will come very easily.
Well, I welcome this. I think this is extremely positive, and working together on all levels has only got to be for the greater good. And I'm amazed that we haven't even got to agenda item 1 yet, and we've had such a positive meeting. So thank you for that. Okay, so moving on. Agenda item 1.
Before you move on,
sorry,
Chair, can I
yes,
just
Wilma.
check a procedural point? Ever wary of kind of meeting security, I noticed that Mayor Palmer has 2 presences on the screen. Perhaps could you just confirm that you're connected via 2 devices?
James, you're on mute.
I'm looking at the other one. I didn't really, I've got no idea. I'm logged on my computer only. So why it's saying that, I genuinely couldn't tell you. And if I click on it, it's I don't know what.
Okay, so Dan or Wilma, could you remove the James Palmer that we're talking about without removing the real one? Thank you.
Yeah, it's done. Thank you. Okay. I just wanted to make sure, in case you were on another device, another microphone or something, but thank you very much.
Thank you. No idea what that was.
Thank you, Wilma. Well spotted. Okay, agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Could I ask the Democratic Services to report any apologies?
Thanks, Chair. There are no apologies.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 2, appointment of Vice Chairperson. As reported, Councillor Van der Veer had been Vice Chairperson of the Executive Board, and it's now necessary to appoint a new vice chairperson. So I would call for nominations at this particular point, but I would like to nominate Councillor Neil Goff from the chair, and would like to look for a seconder if possible, please.
I'm very happy to second it. It also means that I continue in the noble role of not being in either of those two positions.
Correct, Councillor Lewis, and you sound very joyful at that. So I will ask for any further nominations just in case. And if someone does feel wicked, they could nominate Councillor Lewis. Okay. So assuming there's no further nomination, we would vote on this appointment. If I will just ask, if anyone disagrees, could you please show with the appropriate raised hand function now?
I think it's an excellent appointment.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Okay, so I declare the vice chairperson is Councillor Neil Goff. Congratulations, Neil. Well, hard fought.
Thank you very much. It does feel like I've gone from 0 to 60 in a few seconds, but very happy to do it.
Great. Moving on, agenda item 3, declarations of interest. I'd like to ask if there are any declarations of interest from the Executive Board members. If so, please raise your hand. I'm not seeing any hands. Obviously, if something does come up as we're talking, please make it known to me. Agenda item 4. I'd like to draw members' attention to the report circulated with the agenda on the Joint Assembly membership, setting out details of nominations received from the university. I'd like to invite Phil to comment on the nominations. Phil Mendiger, if you would, please.
Thank you, Roger. Very briefly, the university, along with other members of the GCP, gets to nominate a number of members of the Assembly to represent education more broadly across the Greater Cambridge area. After consultation and following the retirement of two of our nominees, we approached Karen Kennedy and Lucy Scott, as the report sets out, and I met with both, and Rachel met with me with Lucy as well, and we talked through the role. Both Karen and Lucy were keen to then put their names forward, but it's for this board, the Executive Board, to approve the appointment of both Karen Kennedy and Lucy Scott.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, yes, just to remind members, these appointments require endorsement by the Executive Board, and I now invite members to accept the nominations. If anyone disagrees, could you please raise your hand?
Agreed.
Yeah, no hands raised. Therefore, those appointments are declared as such. So thank you for that, Phil. Agenda item 5, minutes of the previous meeting. I'd like to ask the Executive Board to confirm the accuracy of the minutes of the last meeting. I know it's fair. What we've done before is we've gone through each page by page, and I'm just going to ask the board, do they still want me to run through it page by page, or are you quite happy for me to take it on block? And if anyone has any problems with it, then obviously they can let me know.
Happy on block.
On block, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I've read them all and they are an accurate reflection.
Okay, so if anyone wishes to discuss or comment on the minutes at all, please raise your hand now. Okay, there's no one indicating, so therefore that's confirmed and agreed the minutes as published, and I'll sign the minutes as a correct record when I'm able to do so. Agenda item 6, questions from members of the public. I would like to report that I have accepted 2 public questions for submission to this meeting of the board. Details of the questions have been published and are available for both members of the Executive Board and the public to see. One question relates to agenda item 8, Greenways, and one question relates to agenda item 9, better public transport, Water Beach to North East Cambridge. Questions will be read out by an officer at the start of the relevant agenda item. Agenda item 7, feedback from the Joint Assembly. I would like to inform the board that Councillor Tim Bick is in attendance as chairperson of the Joint Assembly, to provide an overview of the meeting held on the 10th of September. And I'd now like to invite Councillor Bick to present his report. Tim.
Thanks very much, Roger. Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Assembly met on the 10th of September, and our report is there for you on pages 39 to 42 of your pack. To highlight the headline points would be to say that in broad direction, the Assembly supported each of the recommendations that have come before you today. So that's a somewhat remarkable outcome, that we are all on the same page. That there are nevertheless, and as you would expect, a series of points of detail, points of emphasis, suggestions of issues for subsequent steps which accompany that endorsement of broad direction. But looking through your reports on the individual items, I believe that those points have been incorporated in the reports that you've got to discuss. So I think that that is most of what I wanted to say, except to say that amongst the points that that we were supportive of the overall direction, I think there was worthy of saying that we had particular anxiety to support the measures proposed later on the agenda in relation to skills and employment, and with some enthusiasm are very keen that you support what is recommended, because we're clearly in a critical phase of the labour market in relation to COVID. But Chair, that's all I wanted to highlight. It's all written in front of you. If there is a need, based on the turn in your conversation, for me to highlight something from the Assembly when you come to the items, if I could just indicate and ask for your discretion at that point.
Yes, of course, Tim. And if for any reason I don't see you, just shout out. So thank you for that. So has anyone got any questions, please, for Councillor Bick? I'm not seeing any questions at the moment, Tim. So thank you very, very much for your report. And we may be coming back to you. Okay, agenda item 8 is Greenways, Barton, Bottisham, Hornsey, Sawston and the Swaffhams. And I'd like to just make it clear how we're going to carry on with this agenda item. First of all, we'll have the public question and the officer response to the question. And then we'll have the officer introduction. And then we'll go to the board debate. So starting that off, may I ask the officer, Wilma, I think it is.
Yes,
is it Wilma? Yeah, hi, Wilma. Wilma, to read out the public question received from Linda Worth, County Access and Bridleways Officer, Cambridgeshire British Horse Society.
Thank you, Chair. The question reads as follows. Reference in the meeting documents is made to the cycle path through the wing development. This is to be a non-motorised user route available to pedestrians, cyclists and equestrians. The same applies to the quieter load, well-used cycle path. These are non-motorised routes, not cycle paths. Prior to approval of the Greenways proposals today, will the GCP please confirm that shared use is as defined in all the Greenway consultation documents, available to all 3 vulnerable road users, pedestrians, cyclists and equestrians? And will it ensure that the routes are delivered as such? This applies to all the routes being considered at this meeting. Will the board ensure that equestrians are not excluded from any sections unless a genuine safe alternative route is available to them? Defaulting to the legally available option of the busy highway, already identified as unsafe for cyclists, does not count as safe. Where pedestrian cycle-only routes are to be created, pedestrian or cycle-only routes are to be created or improved, will the board please require that the safety audit must assess the impact on the safety of equestrians created by the schemes. That's it, Chair.
Thank you, Wilma. So I'd now like to invite Peter Blake, GCP Transport Director, to respond to that question. Peter. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Chair. Thank you. So the Greater Cambridge Partnership has committed to the principle of inclusion for all non-motorised users along greenways. We do recognise there are some specific challenges and constraints in providing for equestrians, but we have agreed to seek to secure alternative routes where possible. Safety audits will assess the impact on all non-motorised users, so that will include equestrians, and we will continue our dialogue with the equestrian groups as we enter into the design phase of the project.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much. So now I would like to go back to you, Peter, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just introduce my colleague, Simon Manville, who's the project lead for this, and he's available to answer any technical questions that you may have. In summary, the board will recall that the Greenways network is a network of 12 high-quality cycle routes connecting the South Cambridgeshire villages with Cambridge. It's designed to cater for existing demand, but also future developments such as electric bikes and the like. And it very much supports Greater Cambridge Partnership's objectives of promoting sustainable travel and tackling congestion. This is the third in a series of reports that you've received, and it updates on consultation to date on the various routes and the next steps, in this case for the 5 greenways. And what the report is doing is seeking your approval to move to a detailed design and an assessment of land and land acquisition. All of the greenways will come back to you next year for a final decision on whether or not to proceed. So this report, as I say, covered 5 of the greenways: Barton, Bottisham, Horningsea, Sawston and the Swaffhams. The consultation undertaken has demonstrated very high levels of support for the scheme, recognising that we're now moving into the detailed design phase, and we will continue with that engagement with local stakeholders. As Councillor Bick outlined, the Joint Assembly supported the proposals. I was challenged again around the timeline, and I made the commitment that we will deliver these schemes as soon as is reasonably practicable. The issue around the timeline depends on land acquisition. If we can do that without compulsory purchase, then clearly that will speed things up significantly. The route details are as the previous reports that you've seen. So for Barton, it's paragraph 5.9, Bottisham, Horningsea and the Swaffhams, paragraph 5.17, and Sawston 5.24. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. You actually mentioned the one concern I had, which was land acquisition, just in case it does prove to be more of a problem than maybe we think it would be. Is there anything on the horizon that the board should know? You mentioned compulsory purchase, which no one wants to go down that route. Could you just enlighten us on the land acquisition and any potential mishaps coming along?
Well, all of the greenways require some form of land acquisition. Some of them quite significant, others less so. We have appointed land agents to work with us on all of the network routes that have been agreed hitherto, and it's subject to your agreement today. They will then pick up the 5 routes. Clearly, as you rightly outlined, we will be seeking to do all of this by agreement, because obviously that is the most conciliatory way, productive way, and frankly the shortest way of doing this. But at your last meeting, you did allow me to hold the option of compulsory purchase if required, to ensure that these schemes are delivered to the quality that you wish to see in terms of delivering this network. So we actively recognise that land is the key risk, and we're on with land agents mitigating that risk, Chair.
Good, thank you for the clarity. Does anyone else have any questions, please, from the board? I'm not seeing anyone, so on that basis, then I'd like to go to the recommendations and take them on block. We've got recommendations A to I, which I'm not going to read out. If anyone disagrees at all, could they raise their hand? Okay, I'm seeing no objection, and then I declare the recommendations carried by affirmation. Thank you very much, everyone. And I'd also like to thank Mrs. Wall for her question and Peter for his report on that. Agenda item 9 is better public transport, Waterbeach to North East Cambridge. Again, I just state how I take this. We've got a public question. Then we'll receive the officer response to the public question, then the officer presentation to the report, and the executive board debate. So starting off, Wilma, would you like to read the question submitted by Paul Bearpart, please?
Thank you, Chair. I live on Cambridge Road, Waterbeach, close to 3 of the 4 route proposals through Waterbeach Village. I am the founder of Waterbeach Cycling Campaign, and I led the development of transport policies for Waterbeach Neighbourhood Plan. I strongly support improved active travel and public transport provision. However, I am concerned that the narrow range of options through Waterbeach, with 3 of the 4 options taking the same alignment through the Cambridge Road, Glebe Road pinch point, and insufficient weight given to the difficulties of delivering a route through here, will lead to difficulties delivering the entire route. These difficulties are only mentioned in Appendix E, page 142 of the board paper, which states, space is constrained here, so any transitway alignment may either require housing demolition or would encroach on allotments, passes close to houses and may face opposition from residents. The project manager has told me that no demolition is intended, but it is difficult to see how a route through this pinch point is possible without demolition or significant impact on residents. Question 1, can the GCP provide a route through Waterbeach Village that will not involve demolition of property or result in significant opposition from residents? Question 2, why are there not more route options through Waterbeach Village? For example, a route along Waterbeach High Street was rejected very early in the process. Concerns about reliability could be addressed through consideration of parking controls and modal filters at suitable points. This would have the additional benefit of making the centre of the village more attractive for walking and cycling and better serve the east of the village and Newtown. Question 3, will a detailed map showing houses at risk of demolition or significantly affected be available during the consultation? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Wilma. So I'd like to go to Peter again to respond. We've got the question there and 3 sub-questions within that, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. So the question illustrates well why consultation is the next stage of the process. We are not currently considering detailed route proposals at this early stage of the project. We've not undertaken the appropriate investigations, technical work, or indeed heard back from consultations. At this stage, we're assessing the very broad picture of where this route should begin and end and key issues along the corridor. So the search area that is shown through Waterbeach is intended to illustrate the appropriate areas to consider if and only if it is determined that a segregated route should also serve Waterbeach Village. This is going to be a key question for the plan consultation. And indeed, a number of other options that the questioner outlines are worthy of consideration as we move forward to any route alignment decision, but that isn't yet. In this early stages of assessment, we've had a high-level review of a number of alignments, follow the railway line, a route that follows the A10 alignment, using the high street. But again, this is just to give a sense of what the key issues are along the corridor. So we fully understand that passing any route in this area would bring it close to residential properties, and that's exactly why we're proposing a public consultation as the next step in this project. Hope that's helpful, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Could you just clarify something, just so that people know we try and get as comprehensive an answer as possible? On the second sub-question, it says why there are not more route options through Waterbeach Village. For example, a route along Waterbeach High Street was rejected very early in the process. Could you just explain that particular, the question is implying it was actually rejected very early in the process. Is that correct?
No, so no route has been rejected because
Yeah.
we're not at that stage of the development. We're obliged to follow the Department for Transport's process, and at the moment we're at the strategic stage, and that's saying where are the key points you're aiming for, what are the key considerations. We need to garnish residents' views on that. We will then move, subject to board decisions, to a future stage where we get detailed route alignments, and then I would imagine all of the options and more that are raised by the questioner will be considered and will form part of a future consultation, Chair.
Thank you for that. That is how I read it and heard you. I just wanted to clarify for everyone else in the questionnaire in particular. So thank you for that. Okay, so moving on, I'd like to go back to you, Peter, to introduce the report itself.
Thank you, Chair. So again, if I can introduce my colleague, Paul van der Bulk, who's the project lead and is available for any technical questions. So the public transport Waterbeach to North Cambridge project, this is an update on the work to date, and in terms of the answer that I've given previously, and a proposal to consult later in the year. The Waterbeach to North East Cambridge project follows from the previous A10 study and the need for greater infrastructure improvements along that corridor, both because of existing congestion and the planned developments that are coming forward in the current local plan period. The board will recall that the development of major transport schemes follows a process prescribed by the Department for Transport. And at your last meeting, at your meeting in February, you agreed to commence the strategic phase of scheme development, which, as I've outlined in my response to the questioner, is the initial technical assessment and early stakeholder engagement. And appendices 1 and 3 outline the options appraisal report and the early engagement report covering those two items, Chair. Stakeholders have recognised the need for significant improvement along that corridor, in particular linked to the growth and Waterbeach Newtown in particular. It's also important to note that this work is designed both to complement the combined authorities' work on dualling the A10, and as the Mayor outlined previously, we've had discussions with his officers to ensure that happens, and we're working closely with them, and also to support the delivery by the combined authority of the CAM network, and similarly working with officers to do that. So consultation is designed as the next step. It's a key component of building this strategic case to be clear that we all understand what the scheme requirements are. We understand the interactions, and we've heard about one interaction from the questioner around the interaction with Waterbeach Village, but also that relationship at the south of the route in terms of the Science Park, Cambridge North Fringe East, and then also the Cambridge North Station and what those interactions mean. And it's essential that we get the public's views at this stage. As Councillor Bick outlined, that the Joint Assembly supported the next steps. I think they rightly emphasised that this needs to be seen within the context of wider connectivity, both with the wider public transport network and particularly with that continued dialogue with the combined authority and their proposals bringing forward dualling of the A10. So I hopefully that sets the scene, Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
It certainly sets the scene, Peter. Very comprehensive, thank you. I'm opening up, and Claire Ruskin would like to ask a question. Claire.
Thank you, Chair. The discussion in the Joint Assembly was particularly useful on this topic, and I'm picking up some of those points and then adding a couple. This is an area with a lot of change going on, multiple factors to consider together. And I know the officers have done this so far, but just encouraging you to keep collecting the data, keep thinking of the travel predictions, the numbers that we will be catering for in a few years' time, not just that we are already looking at. Making sure we're joining up the thinking on all modes. Has been a lot of discussion of rail transport here, and just making sure that we do have those modes all considered, and to also in any consultation, but this one in particular, add any other suggestions as one of the big boxes that are blank and open at the bottom of the consultation, so that we do get in all thoughts that people have, so that we don't get stopped at the very last minute on any of the schemes by somebody saying you didn't consult us, because we have done, but just let's make that really big open box available to people. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Just before I come to Neil, Tim Bick, I will come to you after Neil, just in case you want to add anything. If you don't want to add anything, that's fine. But as Claire said, obviously the Assembly did have a good discussion over this. So Neil.
Thanks, Roger. I've got two points. The first one for Peter, and I'll make this point also in relation later to the Eastern Access project, because I think it's also relevant that the way in which we do these evaluations, the sort of actual study area itself is fairly tightly drawn. And in the particular case of Waterbeach, even what are considered to be the sort of secondary markets, such as Old Waterbeach and Milton, really don't fully capture the potential impact and the beneficiaries of a scheme which is as fundamental as this. And the report often talks about sort of complementarity and complementary and opportunities, which is great. But I just wonder whether, Peter, you would like to answer the question in 6.4.3, which is the sort of list of criteria. It doesn't seem that those sort of complementary opportunities carry forward into the evaluation between the options. And I'm a little concerned that unless one has that front of mind as you go through, two things might occur. One of which is that not all the options may have the same degree of complementarity associated with them. So there may be a difference. And then secondly, that if we don't keep on considering those and have those at front of mind, the risk is that they're not planned in, and therefore subsequent in more detailed design phase, they're lost. And I just wonder whether you comment first instance on how that complementarity will feed into the decisions on the preferred option.
A couple of things there, Peter, if you could.
Thank you, Chair. So I mean, you're absolutely right. What we are doing, in a sense, is we are balancing the requirements we need to go through with Department for Transport, which, if you would like, is very hard, brass tacks. What are the details around this particular scheme? And then, quite rightly, you have raised, Claire has touched on it, the Joint Assembly covered it, about the issue of this needs to be considered as part of the wider whole. That's exactly why we go to consultation, and in this case at such an early stage, to capture those issues. If you recall from some of our other projects, we've then gone down the line of producing public transport proposals on the back of it in terms of bus maps and cycling maps. That's why we're seeking to integrate walking and cycling, not just as a sort of a bit part of these schemes, but having a cycle network that runs alongside, and then we'll need to complement things like the greenways that are also operating in that area. So that is something that, as we go through the process, at every stage, we need to be demonstrating that point. But we can't lose sight of the rules of the game that we are obliged to meet, which is the rules that the Department for Transport lay down. So I think you're absolutely right to raise it, and we can't lose sight of that. Equally, we need to make reports to government that meet their appraisal requirements.
Neil, are you okay with that?
Yeah, and I think it's just okay. I'm pleased with the answer, because actually I think it's about keeping that balance and keeping alert to the sort of broader impact. And I agree with Peter. You have to restrict the study, but this is a potentially huge impact, as is the Eastern Access project too as well. So we need that in sight. Chair, could I just make one other comment as well, which sort of picks up on the and this is just a comment picking up on the question from the member of the public as well, is that, you know, I appreciate Peter's response to the member of the public, because the process of consultation is always difficult. I just encourage us to, as we go through this, in the spirit of sort of bringing people along and making them aware of what's happening, that where we are aware that there is a particular impact or potential impact on some of the options, for example, like demolition, that we really redouble our efforts to engage with the residents and the businesses who are those affected. I think that will stand us in good stead, and I'm sure we'll be doing that, Peter, as we go forward. But I'd like to make that commitment to the public in relation to issues like the question raised.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. As I said, I'll bring Tim in at the end after people on the board have spoken, in case there's anything outstanding from his respect. I've got Lewis and then Phil. Lewis.
Thanks, Chair. I haven't got a question. I just wanted to state support for this project, because whilst it is in a complex developing situation, both with the potential of Cam Metro and proposals to improve the A10, it's a zone where there's a real transport challenge to encourage people to mode shift from cars onto public transport. At the moment, you might get out of a park and ride at Milton, but you've still got the huge challenge of that A10, A14 roundabout. And if car volumes increase, that'll only get worse. So I think one of the critical parts of this is actually to find the right route across the A14 to enable that strong south-north link to be effective. And I put in a voice for the Cambridge North East development simply because this is part of making that sustainable. So yes, north-south can be improved with further rail improvements, but even that will reach capacity. And yes, we'll have really strong links from Ely to Waterbeach, Cambridge North, Central South. But if Cam Metro is going to work, a route like this really is critical, and it opens up other opportunities. So I think it's a really important way of improving options for people to come into the city. And then Cam Metro will also enable the relief of roads like Milton Road and what is currently an increasing congestion into the north part of Cambridge. So it's critical that we've got this route which enables fast public transport in the 2020s, but also then can transition to be a critical route for Cam Metro. And we look forward to working with you, James, on this route as well.
Thank you, Lewis. And you did mention Cam Metro twice, and I saw James twitching immediately, and I'm glad he's going to speak. I've got Phil to speak next, though.
Thank you, Roger. And it was really a related point to Lewis, which is, I think we have an opportunity here to get the sequencing of these improvements right, which is to put in the improvements in public transport first, and that includes Cam Metro, before we start then considering other options that will not reduce dependency on private motor vehicles. I'm talking here about dualling the A10. And when we've put public infrastructure in previously, the guided busway to St Ives and down to the biomedical campus, that's been done before the development has gone in, and that's the right way to do it. And really, this is just a plea. It's not a question, it's a plea to say that's the right sequence, and that's the way we should be looking at these things before we then fall back on other measures, which include increasing road capacity.
I think that's everyone's ideal world, is infrastructure before houses, but doesn't always happen, Phil. James.
It doesn't always happen, which is why we're in the terrible position we're in transport-wise in Cambridgeshire, of course. I wasn't twitching because of Cam Metro, although I might mention it. It was the A14, A10 roundabout that Lewis mentioned, which clearly is a horrendous bottleneck and a really poor piece of infrastructure that hasn't kept up with the growth of the economy in the area. Certainly it's a roundabout that hasn't changed since I was at college at Milton back in the 1300s. But it is due to be developed alongside the A10. And it is very much part of the plans that we're working on. Of course, Peter mentioned that GCP had been involved in discussions with the team for the A10. The options for the A10 are interesting, and we're looking at several. But certainly we're being encouraged by the leader of East Cambridgeshire District Council to include an option that has the CAM as part of the A10 upgrade rather than peripheral to, in the same way that cycle routes will be part of it as well. So we are going through option stages, but it's certainly something that I would encourage the continued joint working of officers to make sure that any transition beyond the route that you're discussing into CAM is simple and not costly.
Thank you for that, James. Thank you. Tim, I'm going to just come back to you, and you don't have to say anything at all. Just wanted to know if we picked up on everything that you felt the Assembly needed us to know.
Yeah, I was going to say something, but actually the points I was going to make have been made by others, and that was primarily in relation to the improvements to the A10 and the importance that it seems to me that project needs to accept this project that we're discussing as a given, as an assumption, because if our objective is for as much of this local traffic to use the sustainable option which we're talking about here and ought to be quite transformative, it's important that we don't over provide capacity on the A10, which then ends up cannibalizing or diverting demand from what this project can achieve. Obviously, other traffic with other destinations uses the A10, and that does need to be addressed. But it's important that we don't kind of try and doubly provide for the same demand from these communities that this project is destined to serve.
Thanks, Tim. I've got no one else indicating they wish to speak, so I'm going to go to the recommendations and take them on block again, A to C. So if anyone disagrees with the recommendations, could they please use the raise hand function now? I'm not seeing any raised hands, and therefore I declare the recommendations carried by affirmation. So thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the question from Mr. Bearpark and for Peter for his report. Thank you very much for that. With the rest of the agenda, we have no more public questions, so we'll do go straight to officer presentation and then board debate. So agenda item 10 is Better Public Transport Cambridge Eastern Access Project. Peter, back to you, please, to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just introduce Joe Baker, my colleague, who's the project lead on this, and again, we'll be able to answer any technical questions that you may have. So Cambridge Eastern Access is at a similar position in scheme development as the Waterbeach corridor scheme. You requested back in February that we start the process of developing the strategic case in terms of this scheme, and so we've undertaken both the initial technical assessment and the early stakeholder engagement that are outlined in the appendices. The corridor is already heavily congested, and unlike Waterbeach, it's in a far more urban environment. There was significant consensus as part of the stakeholder engagement that something ought to be done. Quite what that was there were marked differences in that, and I think paragraph 5.9 tries to bring that out, that people were looking for different things in terms of the next steps, which again leads us to conclude early public consultation is important. Again, from a strategic perspective, we are seeking to support delivery of Crime Authority's CAM network. We're looking to promote sustainable public transport, walking and cycling options. And so as part of the proposals to the report, we're suggesting actually there may well be a shorter term set of interventions akin to Cambridge Southeast. You'll be aware we're doing some short-term improvements now, principally around walking, cycling, public transport. So we're suggesting there's some benefits, or maybe some benefits of doing that on Newmarket Road, as well as the larger scheme. But clearly that is all subject to the public consultation, which we're requesting your approval for later this year. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'll open it up to the board for any questions. No, I'm seeing none. Okay. Phil, you just got in there.
Sorry, it was just there was a point on in the report, page 213, talking about Mill Road Bridge. It says there's support for maintaining it, but there's also opposition against it. How are we going to resolve that?
Peter?
Well, I'm rather hoping the county council are going to resolve that in the short term. I think what we're trying to do at the moment is just to capture the mood music from this early engagement. What we need to do is to say that that's helpful, but we need to get under the skin of this with a full consultation. Let's sit down with the various groups and let's understand what the pressure points are. And again, going back to the question that Neil was asking, let's understand what we need to focus on in terms of this project specifically, but what we need to be mindful of in the wider context and the wider role this project can play in terms of that development. So short-term answer to that, I'm afraid. We need to capture it, and then that's something we need to particularly test with stakeholders and communities as we go through scheme development.
Okay, Phil, thank you. Claire?
Comments, well, I think we've had a lot of questions on this before, but again, the whole wider area is very important, and looking at the journey data and predictions, knowledge as we focus down to this quite small area, that Mill Road and Coldham's Lane and all the roads between them are really quite coexistent, and we need to make sure that we've looked at all the ways that people are going to get stuck. Once gridlock starts, it spreads very, very quickly in this region. So the number of hours I've spent queuing on roads in this particular zone is quite phenomenal, even on my bike. So please take care of all the data and all the wider region that we're looking at.
No, thank you. Absolutely, Claire. It is the nature of the area that if there's a little hiccup somewhere, it doesn't even have to be near you. It's like a butterfly effect. You're absolutely right. Lewis.
The point I'd like to add is that this zone is a zone of two halves, and it's got some similarities to the one that we've just discussed, in that if you think of the area that's to the west of where McDonald's is, for instance, on Barnwell roundabout with Newmarket Road, where Barnwell Road joins, it's a hugely constrained area. I personally don't see any potential for surface off-road public transport route, because the amenity value and the precious aspect of places like Coldham's Common or the common towards the river, where I'm glad to see building Chisholm Trail at the moment. Ditton Fields, those areas, they're not capable of being the carrier of a different route. And if we look at what the GCP's brought forward for Milton Road, what I would ask in the next phase, Peter Blake, is that we have a look at actually trying to see how we can address the on-road, because I cannot agree that the arrangements for Newmarket Road are the right ones. The road space is hugely altered in the way it's configured, and it actually makes the transport challenge of that part of town worse, including for public transport. So if you've got an environment where you regularly have in the morning queues for two miles, and you regularly in the evening have queues going out, of course I want to see public transport, but I just think we also have to look at the on-road issues in the medium term in terms of the 2020s. The position's very different to the east side. I think there's significant opportunities, and clearly there is a big proposal which is going to be considered in the local plan for the airport area, subject to what Marshall will do in the future. And there is more space there. But unless we can address some of the challenges of Newmarket Road, as well as get people to shift to public transport, I think we have a big problem. And then in terms of options to the east, I have been one who've wanted rail to stay on the table. Of course, I'd like Cam Metro to have a tunnel head somewhere in the vicinity there, which can then link to a surface route. But I think we need both to produce a route which serves the Cam Metro project, but also continues to look at options of improving rail connectivity there. We've got a rail line out to the east, which is neglected by Network Rail. It really hasn't reached its potential. Single line, very little capacity, already heavily up to full capacity, even with 3 carriage, and that seems revolutionary trains coming in. So I appreciate all the work that's been done. It is a heavily constrained zone. I look forward to the further work and the integration with what comes out of the local plan. A lot of people will support major change in this area, including the local residents. We have some of the worst air pollution in Cambridge in this zone. And I do hope that we will come forward with a solution that sorts that out as well. Thank you, Chair.
Peter, I think, Lewis, if I can kind of summarise what the main question was there, how much flexibility is there with road space, etc.? And there's also cemeteries, etc., around there. What flexibility is there, as Lewis is suggesting?
So that's exactly why we've highlighted that we think there is a shorter term option just to make the flow a lot better along Newmarket Road. So that might be a whole number of things, building on the traffic signals work we've already done, looking at how we use the walking, cycling and public transport provision. So we think that there is a shorter term project that we will, subject to consultation, that we can develop that will ease things in that, the next 12, 18, 24 months, whilst we consider the bigger option. But I think it is important to reflect that Newmarket Road is a pipe that is only so big, and there's an awful lot of stuff trying to get through that pipe. So we can make that, a more elegant solution. We can make that flow better, but there is still, a huge number of people, individuals, traffic, transportation that's trying to come in from the east. And at the moment, all of the data, and Claire's absolutely right to say we need to continue to be mindful of that. All of that data is demonstrating that a more significant transport intervention is also required.
Thank you, Peter. James.
Thanks for the question, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Lewis.
I was just supporting that, and I welcome the response, because even within its limitations as a pipe, I don't think the pipe is designed the right way at the moment.
Okay, understood and noted. Thank you. James.
Yes, and of course you'd expect me to say the long-term solution is there, obviously in the planning, and that is CAM Metro over the portal, under the rail, under the airport, and of course the links out into those travel to work areas that create a significant amount of the congestion when it gets to Cambridge. What I would say is, as well as that, and I appreciate that's the long-term solution, not the one that's going to be the next 12 to 24 month solution. But this was, I know quite well, and my view is that the Park and Ride site is in the wrong place. If the Park and Ride site was closer to the A14, east of the roundabout, Cherry Hinton roundabout, and I know there's a significant amount of county council land there, you would be able to ease the congestion significantly on the Tertiary route around the airfield, and I believe that more people would use Park and Ride, because certainly once you've queued all the way round the roundabout to get to Park and Ride, Newmarket Road doesn't seem so daunting when you're in a car, that you probably just stay in it. I certainly have done this myself, stay in it and continue into the city. I don't know if that's what you're looking at or whether it's affordable or not, but it seems to me to be a very simple short-term solution to ease traffic flow in that area.
So can I ask Peter, the Park and Ride, somewhere in the back of my mind, I was thinking there was discussions of moving that further out at some stage.
That's right, Chair, and I think that the Mayor has far more eloquently identified the issue than I could. So in terms of our technical work to date, moving that Park and Ride further out appears to be an obvious, relatively quick win, and it's something that we wish to explore as part of the sort of both the technical work, but particularly the public consultation.
Thank you. Claire, you wanted to come back in?
Just to comment on the current traffic building up again post-COVID, it's already very, very congested along this area. So it's not something that we can say is diminished by the reduced office working at the moment. And I know we hear far more from the protesters, from the advocates for any scheme, but the Mill Road redirected traffic is going directly along here at the moment. So it's going East Road, Coldham's Lane as the only obvious alternative. So I do think, not having looked at the data, because I haven't had access to that yet, I do think that there is more congestion along these routes at the moment than there was when Mill Road Bridge was open.
Thank you. Okay, I've got no one else that wishes to speak or come in on this. So I will go to the recommendations as per our agenda pack. We've got recommendations A to C, which again, I'll take on block. So I'll put it to the vote. If anyone disagrees with recommendations, could they use the raised hand function, please? Okay, I'm seeing no raised hands. So on that basis, I declare the recommendations carried by affirmation. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Peter, again. Moving on, agenda item 11, skills and employment. I'd like to invite Niamh Matthews, Head of Strategy and Programme, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you, Chair. Okay, so just to set out some context at the front end of this, I'm kind of conscious there's quite a lot on skills in both this paper and the quarterly progress report, which is coming up next. If I kind of quickly just set out at a high level the skills and training proposals in front of you today, that might kind of help set it out in a methodical kind of way. So I think they can be separated into two categories. So the first is that the skills working group asked officers to kind of understand where we could intervene in the short term and actually really quite quickly to try and have some impact on some of the immediate issues we're seeing on skills and training as a result of COVID. So as a result of that kind of request, there are two proposals in your next paper, the quarterly progress report, which ask for your approval on a proposal to extend the current Form the Future contract to allow for an increase in the number of careers advisors, and also asks for your approval on a proposal from the New Meaning Foundation to support further skills and training in construction. So as I said, two proposals, the very short-term, quick proposals that we'll come to in the next paper. And the kind of second chunk of the skills stuff in this set of papers is the far more meaty, kind of impactful, longer term stuff that's set out in the paper in front of you right now. So this proposal, the one I'm about to talk through, is designed to target the impacts of COVID in the kind of medium to longer term. And as I say, far more kind of significant in its breadth and scope than the other couple of proposals we'll run through shortly. So assuming that makes sense, I'll bring you through the longer term proposal that's in front of you now. So this paper is asking for your approval on a proposal to procure a new skills contract that's nearly entirely based on addressing the skills and training issues we think we're going to see as a result of COVID. So it absolutely builds on the successful work that Form the Future and CRC are currently doing in Greater Cambridge. But actually it's more targeted and it's at a far more kind of significant scale than current delivery. So section 5 kind of sets out some of the issues around what we know about how people's jobs and training are likely to be impacted by COVID. And there's some kind of clear evidence in there around the impact that long-term spells of unemployment can have on people and particularly have on people that are trying to gain kind of good quality employment. We also touch on the end of furlough and some of the kind of likely impacts that we think that's going to have on the labour market. So with those kinds of things in mind, officers have carried out some extensive research supported by the Combined Authority with businesses and providers, just to understand how we might start to shape a scope for this more significant intervention. From that work, we've kind of identified 4 broad themes. These are set out in 6.1, but broadly they kind of break down into as I say, 4 themes. So supporting young people into employment, support for adults who need to retrain. There's been quite a bit on that this week nationally as well. Preventing NEETs, and we're kind of calling that creating opportunities for all, and ensuring employers can find the skills and talent they need locally. So we've kind of looked at those 4 categories, and then we've worked with businesses again and employers to identify a kind of core set of activities that would in effect deliver on these 4 themes. And really specifically on developing that, just like to kind of thank combined authority officers for their input and support into that work. In terms of those specific activities, there's kind of a real range. These are set out at 6.2, kind of from creating what we're calling a Cambridge curriculum, which is intrinsically linked to the needs of this local labour market, down to intensive support for adults retraining, a specific focus on STEM, more intensive focus work in primary schools, a range of mentoring programs, intensive support for businesses. That came out as something that was really, really important. Increased work and industry placements, and kind of lots more on employer engagement to support that more kind of focused and intensive careers education. So costs and next steps. I think in terms of delivery capacity, what we are suggesting in effect is a real kind of doubling of efforts. So we're proposing we test a procurement process that would double the current annual costs of the current contract. We're proposing that any new contract should kind of offer a level of sustainability and continuity, and therefore suggest that we procure a 4-year contract, which would bring us to the end of the current funding cycle and gateway review period that we're currently in, to 2025. With those kind of things in mind, we're suggesting a procurement exercise to secure a contract up to the value of £2 million over a 4-year period. And in terms of those kind of practical next steps, the current contract we have with Form the Future runs out at the end of March 2021. So to avoid a gap in provision, officers are suggesting we need to get a procurement exercise underway well, ASAP, kind of, if you agree this, as soon as possible, to make sure we have enough time to go through a full and proper procurement process, and secure a new contract for delivery starting April 2021. And just on April 2021, your recommendation B talks about April 2020. That is a typo. It should say, as I've just said, April 2021. So I think I've left you with quite a lot of information. So very happy to take any comments or questions, Chair.
Thanks, Niamh. Can I kick us off on this? Because first of all, thank you very much for the paper. Can I bring you back to 6.2? And there's 12 suggested areas there, which is all encompassing, which you know, I'm looking at and I'm thinking, well, I don't think we've left anything out because it's very comprehensive. But then we go on to 6.3 and it says where possible, activities will be targeted to address areas of deprivation. And I'm just wondering how we're going to actually target those areas, because the 1 to 12 is quite, it's not sort of area of deprivation specific. So how are we actually going to do that, could I ask?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So that was a point that was raised by the Joint Assembly, but a couple of members of the Joint Assembly. I think the honest answer is what we're seeing in some of the evidence is that COVID is having a more significant impact on people that find themselves in areas of deprivation. How we tackle that exactly, I don't think we know yet, but it feels important to build that in as a kind of frame of reference into the procurement exercise, so we can kind of hear from providers and see what kind of bright ideas there are out there, and how perhaps we can target some of those 12 in a way that would support some of those communities. So I don't know what the methodology looks like, but it feels like the right kind of question to be asking at this stage. Yeah, I'm not sure the way forward. To say we should embed it won't always work. I think
You know, maybe if we had some questions to ask about procurement, the default number 1 should be how is this affecting deprivation? How are we addressing it? So I don't have the answer myself. So thank you for your answer as best you could as well. Claire.
Similar question, Roger, actually. So the list of 12, I think it looks to me like a brainstorm flurry there, and I could put that down into about 6 different categories, which I think then feels more manageable, feels like we might be able to deliver 6 things well rather than 12 things in a flurry. And I think you can do an intersection with deprivation with some of the areas that we've got in the region that will need particular help with the mentoring and careers advice. So I think it is something that the skills working group will just be able to deliver something more focused than this list indicates. Niamh, I don't know whether you've got any comment on that, but I would take that down to 6 things, which, for example, there are 2 of most categories in there, with the exception of the primary school, which comes in slightly differently. And I think it is manageable. We do need to do it. The real question is the budget of something like 500k a year is being asked for, which I think is very reasonable in the context of what we're trying to do. That sounds to me like order of 10 full-time equivalents or something. So I think we just need to make sure that we've got suppliers saying exactly what they're going to do and who they're going to have spending how much time on this, because it's quite a big budget.
So Niamh, I don't know if you want to comment on that, and also, is this coming back to us at all?
So shall I take Claire's question?
Yes, please.
Claire, just I think 2 substantive points on the kind of package of measures. I absolutely agree. If it isn't clearly set out in the paper, it should be. As we move into the procurement exercise, should you agree to that, that those specifics will be kind of packaged up, as you say, to kind of package them into kind of categories that's nearly easier to kind of respond to. So that's definitely on the agenda. Helpful point in terms of the deprivation piece, actually, that it feels like there's something to do on there, but more detail I think to get. And on the point about the budget, I think we say in there what we'll want from the supplier is a really, a very, very clear set of operating principles and KPIs to be submitted as part of the process before we kind of approve a specific provider to deliver it. So that's definitely at the forefront. Will it come back, Roger? So what we're asking for today is your agreement to go out to procure the service, or certainly to test the market to see if there is people out there willing and able to deliver what we're asking for. I think we need this up and running by the end of the current contract period, which is March next year. So there's an opportunity to bring it back in your March cycle, to see the kind of the output of the procurement process.
Okay, thank you, Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. So 2 comments from me, and I think Claire's right about the sort of refinement on what this activity is going to do and the deliverables associated with it. But I think one of the points which I do like within that group of 12, and I've had this conversation with Niamh, is that there's a lot of conversation at the moment about the impact of the current situation on young people and adults needing training. But there's also a lot of impact on businesses as well, who have 101 other challenges, and actually giving them more assistance, more of a helping hand in sort of keeping the agenda around apprenticeships and training in front of them, I think is going to be as challenging in this forthcoming period. So I'm pleased to see that emphasis is reflected in those that recommendation. And just one other comment, I'm very supportive as well of going to a 4-year contract. I think that's the right thing in this environment. It means that the relationships which are so important in this sort of area can be established, rather than getting to the position where there's a retender, and the organizations are focused on retendering just when those relationships are going to be delivering. So I'm hugely supportive of that period.
Thanks, Neil. And for me, just to follow up on that, 4 years, yes, it does seem like a good amount of time, but it might not be 4 years that's the ideal amount of time on this. And you know, so we need to keep it under review. But I think it's a very good start. I've got no one else that wishes to speak on this. So I will go to the recommendations, which is 2 recommendations, A, B. A, approve the scope for new skills work package that seeks to directly address the likely impact of COVID-19 on local skills base and labour market. And B, which does approve the proposal to procure a new skills contract over 4 years from April 2020 worth up to 2 million. So I'll put that to the vote. Anyone object, please raise their hand now. Okay, so there's no one objecting. So again, that's approved by affirmation. Thank you very much, everyone. Oh, Claire, sorry, what were you coming in to not vote?
Can I just make sure that it is 2021 in there? I know Neve has got that in her version before we approve that.
Is that agreed? Yeah, we're getting nods. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so that was agreed. Moving on to agenda item 12, which is of course, the progress report. And again, we're going back to you, Neve, to please introduce the report.
Yep, thanks, Chair. So just firstly to introduce Sarah Hayward from the County Council's finance team, who's here to support us on any kind of financial points or specific issues. So as usual, the report sets out the kind of progress across the GCP programme, but it also looks for comments on a number of specific proposals. If it's okay with you, Chair, I will run through recommendations A, B, C and E, and then invite Rachel and Debbie Bondi to run through recommendation D, which is on specific energy grid capacity, which is on a specific energy grid capacity proposal. So if I go with A, B and C first, on A, on progress across the programme, just to say we're only looking at 2 projects at the moment with a red RAG status. They both appear in the transport programme and are the residence parking implementation project, and as you discussed earlier, the Camborne to Cambridge project. On B, as I referred to in the last report on skills, the skills working group asked officers to look at any kind of short-term opportunities to support skills and training in light of COVID. And as I said, there are 2 of those presented here. So just to kind of set those out, in collaboration with combined authority officers, we talk to businesses and providers about any short-term kind of interventions that we might be able to look at, as well as the results of the RAND Europe work, which was led by Cambridge Ahead, but jointly funded by the GCP and the CPCA. So having done that kind of research work, as you can see from section 9, the first short-term proposal is an intervention to extend the GCP's current skills contract with Form the Future, to bring in an additional 2 careers advisors into the area. So the advisors would operate via Form the Future, and kind of support that we would expect them to be able to bring in would be CV writing, interviews, help with applying for vacancies, and kind of playing that motivational role as well. So the cost of the recruitment for those 2 additional posts is expected to be around the 75k mark, and we are suggesting initially that we fund these posts for 1 year. On C, if I move on, which is the second short-term skills intervention at section 10, we're asking the board to approve a proposal that will support the establishment of a dedicated training centre, which will deliver specialist training and support for people who are at, really very high risk of not being able to enter the labour market. So section 10.4 kind of sets this out, but these are likely to be folks that are young people with special educational needs, those with mental health difficulties, the homeless and formerly homeless, and some of those who've served in the armed forces also. The proposal comes from the New Meaning Foundation, who delivered the training for the assembly and fit out of the modern methods of construction units at the Christ the Redeemer site down at Barnwell, which the board supported earlier this year. And just as a kind of update on that, 12 of the trainees that were involved in that project, out of 12 that were involved in that project, 8 are now actually fully employed or have been offered employment. Just wanted to share that kind of bit of good news story, I guess. So the proposal itself asks for support in 2 specific areas. The first is to enable the immediate training starting this month in Waterbeach, if the proposal is approved, of 12 trainees in basic construction skills, with the potential to gain qualifications in English, maths, ICT, up to level 2. The second part of this proposal is to provide startup funding to set up a dedicated training centre in Greater Cambridge. The New Meaning Foundation have a centre already in Buckinghamshire, but this proposal would enable a second centre to be developed in our local area. And as the report outlines, that kind of targeted skills and training of that nature is not available in this area at the moment. So just on to kind of costs, I've split them into 2. So we're asking for 76k to cover the immediate training of the 12 trainees mentioned. That number is likely to grow to 24 per year if the dedicated training centre is delivered. And a further 105k startup funding to set up the dedicated training centre itself. So 181 in total for the proposal. So as I say, they're the kind of 2 quick or immediate short-term interventions that the Skills Working Group were really keen for us to bring forward. So that's those 2. If I move on to E, which is specifically around the COVID recovery strategy, and the kind of the delivery of that strategy and the implementation plan for the delivery of that strategy. If I can take us to section 19, page 377, we briefly set out the work that local authority partners and GCP officers have done in collaboration with the CPCA to support the COVID recovery strategy. I think the first draft of the strategy was presented and approved by the CPCA board yesterday. As part of that work, each area is now due to move into a kind of strategy implementation stage. Officers have already kind of commenced work on what we're calling a kind of local implementation plan, and already have underway in collaboration with the County Council's business intelligence team, a nearly complete kind of monthly dashboard of some of the key impacts from COVID we're already seeing in the economy. That's been kind of shared at officer level in various groups at the moment. I guess in addition to this, and as we drew out of the Hatch report that was produced in June this year, it's really become obvious that there's a lack of available and good quality local sectoral data. So actually properly understanding the local sectoral impacts of COVID is proving to be difficult at that kind of local sectoral level. So in order to get a much better picture of what those impacts are, we are proposing to work with the Centre for Business Research to produce a localised analysis on the sectoral impact of COVID. And again, just to say that this has been discussed really, really positively at officer level at the CPCA-led Economic and Business Sub-Recovery Group that ourselves and district officers attend every couple of weeks. So much of the SPEAR data actually came from the Centre for Business Research, the CBR as it's known. So it feels like there's a really strong and kind of credible link there to that work already. The specific approach to this proposal would involve the CBR using company and employment turnover data to get a detailed insight into our unique local sectors. So part of the process also involves a kind of subsequent review of that company data with really kind of knowledgeable local experts to offer, I guess, a robust and kind of intensive process of data review. I think it just feels like having this data will give us a far better opportunity to deliver a kind of really focused local recovery implementation plan, which feels kind of very important at the moment. To make this proposition viable, we would need to commit to funding 3/4 of analysis. If the process is agreed, it could start this month actually. And should it be agreed, the Centre for Business Research are really keen to present each set of findings to kind of local stakeholders and other interested colleagues. The cost of the 3 data draws would be a total of 36k, and officers are also talking to private sector partners to understand if there is a kind of appetite to share any of those costs. Just to kind of finish off on that, it remains the intention to kind of maintain the collaboration on this work and to continue to take it through the economic and business sub-recovery group to make sure that all those links continue to be made. So, Chair, if I leave it there for now, I know I've gone through a fair amount of detail. Would you like me to take questions or on recommendations A, B, C and E before we move to Rachel for recommendation D? Or would you like us to take questions on the whole report after Rachel's presentation?
Well, I think it probably best to go to you now on A, B, C and E, because there's a lot of information there, and a lot of it was covered, and I can see Phil wants to ask a question on something here already, so we'll come back to D in a minute, I think. Phil.
Sorry, it wasn't a question. I just realised that I should have declared an interest, given that I work for the university. One of the proposals to fund the Centre for Business Research. I've got no connections with the Centre for Business Research, but I should really just record that.
That's fine. Thank you very much. And that's exactly what you should do, Phil, if you realise as we go through. So that's good. Claire.
I don't have a relationship. I've worked with CBR a lot, so I'm a big fan of their work. 2 questions really, both related to value for the money that we're putting into this. What are we planning to do with the quarterly data? So it's really useful to know. I'm sure that Abcam and AstraZeneca are doing really badly and Prowler is changing its name or something. But what are we actually planning to do with that? And while you think about that one, just looking at the cost per job on the New Meaning Foundation, I think this is a setup cost, and then the cost per job would be somewhat lower if we get 24 a year through in the future. Just checking that they are a financially viable organisation. I've looked into them a little bit, but I don't know them particularly well. I know some of the individuals, but not the company. So 2.
And so could I also come in off the back, because I wanted a question off the back of that, because I'm all for 76,000 for 12 apprenticeships there. I mean, that's absolutely brilliant. But 105k setup costs. I know in the grand scheme of things, 105,000 doesn't seem like a lot, but it's still public money. And I'm just wondering what the setup costs were. That was all. So if that's it off the back of Claire's question as well, please.
Yeah, of course. So if I take them in order, on the quarterly data, I think the idea is for us to get an understanding of the kind of state of the local economy at a really local level, and to use that information to kind of understand how we can design our implementation plan for most effect. So I guess the data will help us shape interventions. I guess that's what we do with it. Does that answer your question, or did you have a more sort of specific?
I think so I think the data that we'll be getting is because businesses report their end of year finances at different points of the year, then we'll be collecting those sooner after they've submitted them. So rather than waiting to the end of our year and then doing it on the annual basis that we currently do it, we'd be doing it.
Yeah.
It is then, so we will know whether some of our big businesses are failing or recovering or thriving, and therefore we might plan public transport routes more effectively. It's kind of, we're not going to intervene in those businesses. We're going to use the data to do something different. And that's just to think about before we spend 3/4. I suggest we spend 1/4 maybe and see what we actually get from it. But what are we going to do with it is my real question.
Yeah, okay. I guess using it to shape the implementation plan. I'm repeating myself now, but knowing those sort of, so a bit like the skills presentation that I gave you on the earlier paper. I guess that what the evidence is telling us, that the more we know about what's happening to the economy, I think the more we're able to sort of design interventions that will target those problem areas. That feels like the real benefit of it, I think. But if it would be helpful to sort of bring back some more detail after the first data draw about how it's literally having that impact, perhaps we could do that as part of the first presentation. That would be helpful. Okay, on the New Meaning Foundation, so just to clarify, before we would commit to any funding, there would be a process of due diligence done to ensure all those sort of financial checks, etc. Absolutely. And Roger, on the setup costs, so it's literally funding to construct and have a center for those folks to go into every day. So money to get the materials that would be required to build it, to initially start it up, and to try and get it to a pretty high quality. It would then be or the continued running of it would then be funded via the production and then sale of the units that would be created from it. So I guess the startup piece, it really is startup funding, in that it kind of gets it kicked off and then it sustains itself. That's really the idea of the model.
Yeah, it sounds like a good business case now you've described it like that. So thank you. Okay, Phil, is that a legacy hand or did you want to come in again? It's a legacy hand. Okay, smashing. All right, thank you. So shall we go on to Dee now, please?
Thanks, Chair. That's with me. If I could just say one thing first to go back to Claire's point, because I do think it's important that when we come back to you with some sort of implementation plan that is responding to COVID, you would be the first to challenge us about where are we drawing the evidence about what's the right interventions. So I'd say that I think that's the answer in short, really. We need to understand what is happening in the growth sectors. The City Deal was created in order to remove any barriers to that growth. We've just had a global pandemic, which is still going on, obviously, and going to really change the nature of the business environment. And if we don't understand that, we can't address and flex the interventions that we might see as necessary. I think just to support what Niamh was saying there, really. In terms of recommendation D, then, this relates to a previous decision by the board, which was agreeing the principle of investing in grid reinforcement. So I won't go back over the sort of background to that. It's a project that's overseen by the Economy and Environment Working Group, essentially recognising, again, it's about a barrier to growth, and recognising that unless we are able to remove that barrier, there is a risk that some of the future pipeline of development won't be able to come forward. And equally, our plans for the electrification of transport will be inhibited unless we're able to provide some reinforcement to that grid capacity. So we undertook a couple of years ago some fairly detailed technical work about what the challenge was, and I think we've got that well articulated, and we've set out more detail on the update of the report, paragraphs 1811 to 1813, and then there is an indicative business case set out at Appendix 4 for you. What we're asking the board to agree today is some additional funding in order to take the project forward. So we estimate that we need in the order of about £100,000 in order to really start to test out, what would be the challenges in advancing some of these issues. I should say also that, a number of interventions were identified when we had the technical work done. Most of those are probably in the remit of other organisations, including the CPCA for the more strategic interventions, but the ones that we are focusing on in terms of the very local increase of substation capacity, that we can pinpoint the areas in the Greater Cambridge geography that really do need that reinforcement of grid capacity. So the additional funds would be to look at the detail to finalise the business case, which we would then hope to bring to you for March next year. And in particular, I think it's worth saying that we need to understand better the regulatory framework in which this development would sit, you know, what the ownership issues would be and the like, as well as looking at other legal issues, land acquisition, and planning implications and challenges that would be required before we can complete the business case. So we need some additional help and expertise to take that forward. If you've got any more questions about it, Debbie Bondi is now also joined us, and she's leading on this project for us and can hopefully answer those. But that's the sort of overview of the requirement for the additional funding at this point in the project.
Thanks, Rachel. Can I just say I fully support this, but it does amaze me that I always feel like, because we've done the same sort of work at the County Council, and I just feel like we're doing the work of the power companies. And it amazes me, we can put a business case together, but they can't. But there you go, that's life. So I'll open up to questions. Neil.
Yep, thanks, Roger. So I was just going to pick up on that point and the point which Rachel raised, which is I'm supportive of this going forward, provided we sort of front end load a bit in the work, this sort of issue of the regulatory framework, because this isn't a free market, it's a regulated market. And you know, we just need to be very clear on the basis under which we would make an investment and whether there's a framework which enables us to charge someone to make a return. So before we run off and do a lot of technical work or specification work, I think we need to just ask that fundamental question.
I think our chief exec is under strict instructions to find that out. Claire.
So I'm very much in favour of this. We've discussed it in quite some detail. I think the issue is that we can't make a profit on it, but we can get the money back. So that's the sort of thing we really need to focus on. And I think if we could move faster and put more money into it with that proviso, then I'd be very happy.
Yeah, good point. Anyone else that'd like to speak on this at all? No? Okay, so in that case, I'll go to the vote, and I will take them on block. We have got A to E. I'm not going to read them all out. I'll take it on block. So anyone that disagrees with the recommendations A to E, please raise your hand now. Right, I'm seeing no raised hands, therefore no objections, and I declare the recommendations carried by affirmation. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Nee, for your report on that, and Rachel coming in as well. And for all those that did attend who didn't get to speak, sorry. Okay, agenda item 13 is the date of next meeting, and I confirm that will be at 4 p.m. Thursday, 10th of December. So on that note, thank you very much, everyone that attended today, everyone that took part, and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Bye now.